We welcome you to episode 31 of the Exit Philosophy Podcast. Rich Griffin is here, of course. Call him Griff. I'm Scott MacArthur. Call me Scotty Mac. And the winter meetings are underway at everybody's favorite resort hotel, the Gaylord Opryland in Nashville, Tennessee. And as Griff and I sit here, it is Monday, December the 4th. And Griff, it is appropriate from my perch in Halifax that the winter meetings are underway, because as I look out the window, it is snowing. It has been snowing in Halifax for about 15 hours now, and I would say we've got 20 to 25 centimeters on the ground. So it is winter here. It's the winter meetings. It's the hot stove season. Bring it on.
Oh, no doubt. And they always try and find at least a reasonable climate to hold the winter meetings. I remember when they had it in Toronto, I think it was 1979. It was a culture shock for a bunch of Southern baseball executives who spent the time trying to find what tunnel would lead to their favorite restaurant, because they'd never wanted to go outside. And that's the last time it was held in a northern clime, although Nashville can be cool. But
hasn't Indianapolis hosted the meetings before? Not when I covered the team, but you must have been to Indy. I thought that used to be on the circuit.
It was, and I'm trying to think how many years ago. It might have been 2010 or 2011. So you're right. That was, it's not considered northern, I don't think, but it was freezing. I was staying at a remote hotel like 8 blocks away, and I froze every day going to the main headquarters hotel. It was cold. I forgot.
Well, I mean, maybe it's not considered the North if only because Indiana is probably the south of the North in terms of worldview. But Indiana is right next to Illinois, so right? Like you go through Indiana on your way to Chicago.
Yeah, so it's the mid of the West and the south of the North. It's right there.
Correct and correct. There we go. And that's probably going to be the end of our Indianapolis discussion. Anyway, they're in Nashville, and we are just sitting here waiting. So again, I'm on Atlantic time. Griff is on Eastern time. And as we sit here right now, it is 12:27 in Halifax, 11:27 in the morning in Toronto. And we're not going to timestamp this podcast throughout, but again, if you're listening on Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning, Tuesday evening, and something's happened and you're not hearing about it here, it's because this episode is our weekly episode. Griff and I will jump on and react at youtube.com/exitphilosophy if anything big time happens with the Blue Jays over the next few days. youtube.com/exitphilosophy. You can also get the podcast on our YouTube page. We're waiting on Shohei Ohtani, Griff. That feels like the major domino here that will set the rest of the offseason significant moving and shaking off, because there have been some signings of more middle-tier guys, but Ohtani's at the top of the market, and once he falls, others will follow.
Yeah, and I do believe that there's an understanding among the high-powered agencies and agents and the Players Association that the understanding is that the Ohtani thing needs to be done. The Ohtani signing needs to be done, as you said, because there's so many teams lined up for Juan Soto and for other pitchers, Dylan Cease, for guys like that, that nothing really can happen until the Ohtani thing. And I mean, the feeling is that Ohtani knows where he wants to go. And I've compared it to the Dodgers are Donald Trump and everyone else is Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. I mean, there's that much of a difference, a gap between expectations of who's going to land the prize of Shohei Ohtani. And what's amazing too is the silence, the cone of silence that has gone over these negotiations. And I know that at the baseball writers meeting with Ross Atkins, he refused to mention the name Shohei Ohtani. He didn't mention Juan Soto. He didn't mention anyone by name. And yet, immediately after that meeting late last week, people were talking, well, Ross Atkins has confirmed that. And I found that odd because I was in the room and he didn't confirm any of that. But because if you confirm it, apparently the Ohtani camp is going to rule you out of the running because you broke their cone of silence. So, I mean, all the names of the 5 teams that are involved is all speculation. Clearly, no one was allowed to say they're involved. Even the negotiations that took place or purportedly took place in Los Angeles at the CAA agency, nobody really has any details on that. So we're waiting like everybody else is waiting, but it shouldn't be a surprise if it is the Dodgers.
Yeah, a lot has changed, and it's obviously a different situation. Ohtani's a Major League Baseball player, has been for 6 years, is a free agent. The process is playing out. Just my sense is that there is a portion or a strong portion of the Blue Jays fan base who is fully invested in the notion of Shohei landing in Toronto. And it has, again, a different situation. And even the posting rules for Japanese players coming over have changed since this time. But it has a Yu Darvish feeling to it, where there's a buildup, Yu Darvish, and then he signs somewhere else, and all hell breaks loose. This organization, this, the Blue Jays, that, cheap, da. That's not what's going on here. I mean, the choice is Shohei Ohtani's more than anybody else's, Griff, because all things being equal, all 30 teams would love to have this guy on their team. Things are not equal, so a lot of teams are eliminated simply by virtue of the fact that their markets are too small, and other teams, based on reports, have backed away, whether that's the Yankees or the Red Sox, etc. And so I sit here and I say to myself, man, that'd be one hell of a coup if the Jays land Shohei Ohtani. But if they don't, well, teams get used as a leverage play, right? And until Shohei Ohtani signs with a team that is not the Los Angeles Dodgers, I believe he's going to be a Los Angeles Dodger. And if he signs with the Blue Jays, I can't wait to come on the Exit Philosophy podcast, raise my hand and say, I was wrong. And I'm happy to have been wrong.
Yeah, Shohei Ohtani he's got $20 million in endorsements right now off the field. So he's comfortable, which leads you to believe that money isn't the only factor involved. I mean, you could outbid another team, but when you're up in the 500 to 550 million range, what's 25 million between friends? And this reflects the feeling that baseball had when free agency first started in the 1970s, the mid 70s through the 80s, is that given free agency, and of course, baseball GMs back in those days were all trying to find reasons to keep the restrictions on players moving around. And the feeling that they put out there was that if you give players the right to choose where they're going to go, then everybody's going to end up going to Southern California or to warm climates, and nobody's going to want to go to Cleveland or Cincinnati, which is, I mean, it didn't happen because parity in baseball is more than any other sport in terms of lack of dynasties. I think the mid 90s to 2000 Yankees are as close as anybody has come to establishing a baseball dynasty. But it's the same feeling like with free agency, when they're comfortable, $1 million extra isn't going to make a difference. If they want to play on the West Coast, they'll go to the West Coast, which brings us to now on steroids. A bad comparison to use in baseball, but just multiply that by 1,000 times, and you have the situation with Shohei Ohtani and his ability to choose where he wants to go. So, I mean, Mark Shapiro could walk into that room and say, we'll outbid the Dodgers by $50 million. And I don't think that that's the ultimate defining factor. If he wants to play in LA, if he wants to stay close to where he was before, if he wants to stay close to his medical people who did his surgery, he stays in the LA area. He might not even have to move.
Yeah. And I mean, there's no question the Jays have put a lot of work into their offseason and for some players who are rehabbing or what have you, in-season home down in Dunedin. I'm sure the pitch is, hey, look, you'll be beloved from Victoria in the west to St. John's in the east to Iqaluit in the north, to which somebody like Ohtani might reply, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. He may. I mean, it's typically the Americans who struggle with geography, and Ohtani is not American. But I don't know. Toronto is an extremely diverse city. Don't let him in on the whole traffic issue right now. But like it, so that would work for him. But there's also diversity in Los Angeles, and there's.
And when you talk about the diversity of Toronto, I checked out the last census, and there's 36,000, a community of 36,000 Japanese Canadians in the GTA, which is not a lot. I mean, you go to Southern California and it's, 10 times, 20 times that. I don't know what it is, but it's more than 36,000. And in terms of endorsements, I'm sure that most of his endorsements are not in the LA area. It's with the Japanese corporations, with MLB, and 20 million is a lot to have in endorsements. He's not going to bump that by moving to Toronto. He might bump that if he plays in LA, which again is, when you get into that realm of money making, I don't think that's the defining factor. But I agree with you. I mean, you talk about Americans looking at the choice and they go, well, he might want to play in Toronto because it's a slower paced community area. I don't know what they're talking about, there's not as much media attention, they say. Well, the fan pressure is as big on social media as it is anywhere in major sports, not just Major League Baseball.
Well, and he would no doubt want assurances about where this is all headed, Griff, because the team has major decisions to make on their two young star players coming up here. And when I say the team has major decisions to make, this is similar to the Ohtani situation. The player has a major decision to make on his own end. Is Bo Bichette a Blue Jay for life because the team wants him to be? Well, that's half the equation. Does Bo Bichette want that? Vladimir Guerrero Jr., is he a Blue Jay for life? Does he want to be a Blue Jay for life? What kind of extension are we talking about here? What does he see his value as? And what do the Blue Jays see his value as? And those aren't necessarily questions for the right now because there are 2 years left of control with both players. But that conversation, if neither is signed long-term this time next year, those conversations are going to be had on a daily basis for people who are involved in baseball discussions. And Shohei Ohtani, I can tell you this, I have never met the man. I've never met the man. But Shohei Ohtani is not looking to repeat the team results that he has experienced over the last 6 years with the Los Angeles Angels. He wants to know that, yeah, you're not just paying me, but you are all in now, next year, 3, 5, 7 years from now. I'm not going to be your star hitting cleanup surrounded by a bunch of kids in the middle of a rebuild. I'm not down with that anymore.
My first smile of the day on this Monday morning was turning on MLB Network and seeing the crawl across the bottom that said, Blue Jays unlikely to land both Ohtani and Soto. And I think, whoever said that that was a possibility? And in fact, if we want to like transition into the Soto discussion, I would much rather make that deal. And Ross Atkins and the Jays have shown a willingness to trade top prospects like they did for Barrios. They traded Austin Martin and Simeon Woods Richardson to the Twins to get Jose Barrios. And so I don't think that a package of prospects would be daunting for the Blue Jays in terms of reaching out and competing with other franchises for 1 year of Juan Soto. And I think Juan Soto would be a key. It's his final year of arbitration, so he made 24. So say he gets bumped to 30, 32 maybe via arbitration. You get a season of one of the best on-base power left-handed hitters in the game, which is a piece that the Blue Jays were desperately missing in 2023. And it fills that left field hole. You could reach out and sign a Gio Urshela to play third base. And he would provide the defense that seems to be very valuable or very valued to this new look Blue Jays organization. So I would rather them make a play, see Ohtani go somewhere else, and then make a play for Soto, and then roll the dice with that for a year. See if you want to bid for him long term. Take care of business with Bo Bichette especially, but Vlad also. See what you want to do with them. They have 2 years remaining. But for those who say, well, you could clear salary for Ohtani by trading Bo or trading Vlad, well, that's just what you said, is that's not the point of what Ohtani wants to see. He wants to see a team that's built to compete, that is expecting to compete, that will compete. He doesn't want to see you get rid of other key pieces to make room for him.
Yeah, and just with Soto, and we talked a little bit about it last week, and you can check that out on episode 30, the Soto Voce. And I had to look up that was a Griff always texts me the names of our episodes, and I had no background on where that was, and then I googled it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's play on words. I like it. Griff's thinking on a different level. But if Juan Soto, I'm going to say this right now. I don't even think it's a hot take. I don't even think it's that particularly interesting take. If Juan Soto showed up in a Toronto Blue Jays uniform tomorrow in a trade, he's the best hitter on this team, and it's not close. Not close. Not close. And I'm talking totality. This guy has a .946 career on base plus slugging percentage. That is more than 100 points better than both Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s and Bo Bichette's career OPSs. This guy takes walks, so he's going to annoy you in that Joey Votto way if he's walking a little too much and not mashing enough. But he is a 30 home run hitter, or in that ballpark, probably on either side of it by the time the season ends. He bats left-handed. Stick him in the 2 spot and hope through observation and osmosis and communication that people like Vlad and Bo take some tips from this guy about approach and a willingness to take pitches, et cetera, et cetera. I think Juan Soto, aside from the fact that he's one hell of a ball player, makes your team better in a variety of different ways, simply because the way he approaches at bats, plate appearances, can rub off on some guys who need to improve their approach at the plate. And look, I don't want to suck up all the air here, Griff, but I know that we keep being told that, like, a guy like Bo Bichette, you just have to accept it's going to be 0-2. He's just going to swing, and then he's going to foul pitches off and blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. But there are elements that Bo can improve on as well, and I think a guy like Juan Soto would have an effect on his teammates down the lineup with the way he approaches each and every plate appearance.
Yeah, and the thing that's underplayed here with the acquisition or the potential trade for Juan Soto would be that this clubhouse no longer has anyone that you could point to and say is a leader in that clubhouse. To me, the leader as is right now would be Bo Bichette, and he's 25 years old, hasn't experienced a lot of what some of these other players have. You bring in Juan Soto, you have somebody that he can look at what's going on in the Blue Jays clubhouse and tell Vlad, hey, you got to change this, you got to straighten this out, you got to, and maybe Bo and Vlad are too close in age and experience and have too long a history for Bo to suggest things to Vlad. But Juan Soto is not in that category. Juan Soto would be able to walk into that room, and if he wants to bring back the home run jacket, they'll bring back the home run jacket. But they didn't want to have that because it was Lourdes and Teo and Vlad's idea and Hector LeBron. But you need a new voice in that clubhouse because you just lost Chapman and Kiermaier and Belt. And Merrifield, those are four guys that somebody might have argued were the leader in that clubhouse, but they're not there anymore. And so bringing Juan Soto in, if you bring in Ohtani, you're bringing the circus to town. And that clubhouse doesn't need a circus because there's enough sideshows going on in there anyway. You need a ringmaster, and that would be Soto.
Well, and I like your term ringmaster because you know what he could do? He could walk right in, hold out his fist, presume he has his World Series ring from the 2019 Washington Nationals on his ring finger there and say, see this? I got one of these. And I was mighty young when I got one of these on a team that had just watched Bryce Harper walk away in free agency. And we put it all together and won a World Series. So,
yeah, even 1 year for $32 million at the upper end of what he might earn. Now you have a hell of a ball player for a year where the window is open to win a championship, where they need to compete because of the renovations to the stadium, trying to sell to high rollers in the local community who are not necessarily dyed-in-the-wool baseball fans. You need to sell a winning environment to sell those new seats, those new club memberships. And you have that for one season for $32 million. That means you have $500 million to spend that you haven't committed to one player, Ohtani, moving forward. And granted, he's the best player that may have ever played the game. But in 2024, he's a DH. And Brandon Belt was probably half the production that Ohtani had. But what if he gets hurt? What if the one guy gets hurt like he did pitching and played 135 games? I just think that putting all your eggs in that one Ohtani basket to have the best player, and that we talked about it last week, 23 top contracts, total value, over 110 seasons of those 23 all-time contracts have produced 2 World Series championships. So, there's no guarantee that if Ohtani comes in and you have to save money in other areas, either by trading Vlad or Bo or not being able to add to surround Ohtani, there's no guarantee that's going to win. And history has proven that that's a fact. So let's go all in for Soto, get him to play left field, bat second, show some leadership in that clubhouse, and go get him.
And I do think, Griff, a couple of things. I mean, I'm just glad that we're sitting here having a conversation like this where it feels like what we're discussing is legitimate. Because 10 years ago, 15 years, well, maybe 10 years ago, the Marlins and Mets deals had happened. So should take it back further. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we could be having this exact same conversation, just change the names and the dollar figures because they were large for that time, but not as large as they are now. And it would just be a couple of guys talking about dream scenarios. Like, I don't think Shohei Ohtani is going to be a Blue Jay. I'm, as I said off the top, happy to admit I'm wrong if it happens. Juan Soto is more likely to me because you're dealing with a team and attempting to swing a trade. right? I mean, that's not in Juan Soto's control. He will be a Blue Jay if he is traded to the Jays, and they will pay him for one season before he goes to free agency. But the fact that we can have these discussions and feel like they are legitimate, that wasn't the case in Toronto 15 to 20 years ago. We said, well, we're one of the biggest cities in North America. How come we're not competing? Now the Blue Jays are. And I also think it's helpful to this front office to have the Blue Jays name in the conversation, because the fan base is fed up with these guys. And as long as they're playing with the big boys, even if they don't come out on top, like somebody like me who's been critical of this front office is not going to come out and criticize them for not landing Ohtani, because it's up to Ohtani, right? And if they don't get Juan Soto, well, I mean, I guess my biggest criticism would be, depending on what the return is for Juan Soto, well, geez, for all the talk about draft and develop, you've got a bottom third of Major League Baseball farm system based on the rankings from a variety of different outlets that we get our hands on every few months. And so maybe you didn't have the pieces the Padres wanted. But at least they're in the conversation here. At least they're trying to move and shake, and they know they're up against it a little bit because public goodwill has evaporated, and they are almost a decade into their tenure. Now, the flip side of that is, do they make a hair trigger move to try to save themselves? Well, I'm still all good with you going and getting Juan Soto if you can for a year. Take a shot. That's what this is all about. Don't give me the bullshit about process and process would produce a better farm system than you've got after almost a decade. So I don't want to hear about process. Go get the best players. And I'm glad at least the reports are that the effort is being made.
But the part of that worries me is the reaction of the fan base. And it's all great that everyone understands that the Jays are in the hunt for Ohtani seriously probably in the final 5 teams, and that they are interested in making and comparing to the top offers for Juan Soto. But what worries me is that you just read on social media or hear that failing to get either one will be a reason to hate the Blue Jays organization and to never trust them, as if they were the ones that promised that they would sign Ohtani or trade for Soto, when in fact it was all the speculation on social media and the fan base. So whatever they do after losing out on both those may not be enough. It should be enough in terms of making them competitive for 95 to 100 wins in 2024, but it may not be enough, and that's what concerns me. But to the other point of spending the money, the last time that the Blue Jays were mentioned in this regard of being among the top spenders was 92-93 World Series years, where they were the top spending team in baseball, which brings us to the Hall of Fame selection, overlooking Cito Gaston in favor of Jim Leyland. What's your thoughts on that?
So this is the contemporary era committee, or whatever we're calling it these days. Look, first of all, congratulations to Jim Leyland, who is going into the Hall of Fame, and good for him. Beloved figure, successful manager, won a World Series with the 1997 Florida Marlins, went to the World Series twice with the Detroit Tigers. Before all of that, took the early 1990s Pittsburgh Pirates teams starring Bonds and Bonilla to the playoffs. He's in. Good for him. What I don't know the answer to, and I'm legitimately asking and trying not to sound snide and sarcastic as I do so, is what's the differentiator here between Jim Leyland and the other 2 managers, Cito being one of them? Cito won 2 World Series. Okay, Cito won 51.6% of his games managed. Now, his totality of games managed, far fewer than Jim Leyland's. In fact, Cito managed fewer games than Jim Leyland won, but he managed only 3 more games as total than Jim Leyland lost. So Leyland managed like 3,000 some games. Leyland's winning percentage, 50.6%, 50.6%. One fewer World Series, more World Series appearances, but one fewer World Series victory. Lou Piniella won a World Series with the 1990 Cincinnati Reds, managed a 116-win team, Seattle Mariners, 2001. Managed the Yankees after playing for the Yankees, not necessarily successfully, but that's where he started his managerial career. Took the Chicago Cubs to the playoffs in 2007 and 2008. Like, I'm not sure what the differentiator is that makes Leyland stand out vis-a-vis, and I'm using the other 2 managerial candidates on this ballot. There are others as well, executives and umpires, but I'm not sure what differentiates Leyland from the other 2, other than maybe longevity.
The other thing about Cito is the first African-American manager to win 1 World Series, much less 2. And the reason, or one of the reasons that Jim Leyland may have so many more games managed than Cito Gaston is that when Cito was let go in 97, he never got another managerial position. And we all know that, it's not because he's black. It's because people hire managers with whom they're comfortable. They have a comfort level. And Cito was never, and Hal McRae and other African-American managers that have gone through it have had to battle that friendship thing. And I think that, holding Cito's longevity against him is a disservice to what he did in the dugout as a manager. But in terms of Jim Leyland, I mean, I have a story about Leyland and maybe why he is so beloved. Dave Dombrowski, when he was the general manager in Montreal, started with Jim Leyland in the White Sox organization. Dave was in the farm system, running farm system or helping, and he got to know Jim Leyland there. And when he came to Montreal, when Leyland left Pittsburgh, he tried to hire him in Montreal because he loved him that much. When he got to Florida, Dombrowski, he hired Leyland right away, and they won the 97 World Series. But the story I have about Leyland is when Moises Alou broke his ankle in that Joe Theismann type, and you mentioned somebody else, I forget who it was, who had a similar type injury, and his ankle's lying sideways on the field at Busch Stadium. It was the final game of the series. The Expos were leaving town on the charter. Felipe Alou, Moises' father, was the manager, got on the flight, left. Moises was left in St. Louis in the hospital. Pirates were the next team in to play the Cardinals at Busch. And as soon as the plane hit the ground, Jim Leyland took a taxi to the hospital to visit Moises. He was Moises' first manager in Pittsburgh. He didn't make an impact as a player, but he was his first manager in Pittsburgh. So he landed, went to the hospital, visited with Moises for a couple of hours. And then when Moises had a chance as a free agent, he went and signed with the Marlins, and they went on to win the World Series. So it's the personal touch that Leyland had that may have been part of his impact as a major league manager. When Moises got back to Montreal, he asked me to help write a message of thanks to Jim Leyland. He signed off on it. We sent it. But I knew from that point that if he ever had the opportunity to work with Jim Leyland, he would. And in fact, he did. So, there's more than just sort of analytics and managing a game to being a manager. And Jim Leland had that going for him.
Well, I mean, we talk about it all the time. I can't remember which episode it was, but it was certainly within the last few weeks where we said, look, I still don't understand why this becomes a pro analytics versus anti-analytics conversation. I don't know anybody who actually thinks things through who is anti-analytics anymore. It's just, how are those analytics? How is that data being communicated? Communication is everything. Understanding who you're communicating to is the most important thing. And when there's 26 people in a clubhouse, all those personalities are different, and it's your job as a leader to get to know those people and communicate the information to them. And Jim Leland showing us there with your example. I think you had told me that story before. I don't know if you'd shared it publicly, Griff, but getting right in a cab and going to the hospital, presumably late at night, tells you something.
Yeah, and you're talking about analytics. I was watching the voting results on MLB Network on Sunday night, and they had Jim Leland on from his home, and they asked him about the impact of Dusty and Bochy managing in the World Series, and he said, "We may be old, but we're not old school." And he said, "Some people call it analytics, I call it information." And the ability, and we've talked about it, the ability to process and use when necessary, but to also make judgments on your own is what separates Dusty and Bochy and presumably himself from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, I just circling back to Cito, it's disappointing. It's disappointing, and Cito turns 80. It's unbelievable to think of it, but he turns 80 next March, like in, what is it, 3 months, three and a bit.
So Cito
this was his chance.
I mean, every voter, all 16 voters could vote for a maximum of 3 people. So that means there was an ability, and they had to get 12 out of 16 votes to be in. So there was an ability for 4, maybe 5 people to get in if everyone used their maximum 3 votes. And Bill White should have been in. Bill White has a history as a player, first African-American National League president or league president. And Cito should have been in. There's no doubt in my mind that Cito should have been in for all the reasons we've spoken about before. But, for all those in social media and fan bases all over North America who criticize voting for the regular Hall of Fame and the fact that it's the Baseball Writers Association of America and Canada that votes, and they say, well, they don't know what they're talking about, they screw up. Well, here you have an elite panel of 16 people, including Hall of Fame players, executives, and baseball writers and baseball historians, and they can't get it right. So, what are you saying, that a computer should vote for everything? There's a human element, and you see it on the writers voting for the regular Hall of Fame, and you saw it, the human element, and I don't know why Bill White and Cito weren't voted in, but you see it there. So nothing's perfect. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. And we were talking off air before we hit record here. And I used the Harold Baines example. And I had, when I say this, no disrespect to Harold Baines. I mean, Harold Baines was a good baseball player. But you know what? There's a lot of good baseball players who aren't in the Hall of Fame because they weren't great, top of their class, elite baseball players. And I don't think I'm taking anything away from Harold Baines's career to suggest he's not a Hall of Famer. He's a very good baseball player. But I don't know. And look, I'm getting old, but I'm not old enough to remember Harold's heyday. I remember seeing him play at Exhibition Stadium. It was either he would have come in with the White Sox or Texas back at that point. But I never, even as a kid, I never thought to myself, geez, you know who can't beat the Blue Jays today? You know who they can't pitch to? Harold Baines.
Well, in the draft year where he was selected first overall by the White Sox, Bill Gullickson was selected second overall by the Montreal Expos. And for a long time, it was who made the right pick. Was Baines the right pick to be drafted first overall? And there was some discussion of whether he was or not. And in fact, at times you would think Bill Gullickson, with what he was doing as a starting pitcher in Montreal, was better than the selection of Harold Baines. And I mentioned before we went on that one of my criteria was that if I wanted to go out early, if I wanted to wrap up in my office and go down to see batting practice, to see a guy take BP, that meant to me he had a chance to be a Hall of Famer. Jim Rice was one of those guys, and there's a lot of people who say Jim Rice shouldn't have been in the Hall of Fame, but I wanted to go see him take BP. And I never once did I say to myself, Harold Baines, I'm going to wrap up this section of my notes because I want to go down and see Harold Baines take batting practice. Never happened.
You didn't adjust your morning and afternoon schedule to allow yourself to get into the car a little bit earlier, to get to work a little bit earlier, so that you could be done a little bit earlier to watch Harold Baines take batting practice. Never happened. This, by the way, this was not meant to be a crap on Harold Baines. He was a good ball player, but again, it's a reminder that, leaving it in the hands of the quote experts doesn't mean that the quote experts are going to get it right either.
So I have a question getting back to the Blue Jays and I'm going to ask you this question, getting back to the Blue Jays in the 2024 season. In 2022, the criticism was that they were too hung up on offense and they couldn't play defense and that there was hit or miss, home runs. The run production was good, but the run prevention sucked. So in 2023, they really did go the other way, and guys didn't have the offensive seasons they were expecting, but they'd already got rid of Teoscar and Lourdes because they wanted to replace them with run prevention guys, which were Varsho and Kiermaier, among others. Do you think that there's a possibility that the lessons of 22 and 23 will lead them to the bed that's just right, like Goldilocks? One was too hot, one was too cold, the porridge was just right, or the bed was too soft, too hard, and perfect. Do you think that there's that possibility with this Blue Jays in 24, that somehow they will find that perfect mix?
You mean like if we're doing our fairy tales, the Three Little Pigs? The big bad wolf blew a couple of houses down until they finally got into the brick house and hit that sweet spot where they were safe, happy, and the wolf couldn't get them.
Yeah, there's always a lesson in those fairy tales.
Yeah. I'd love to know what the adults who wrote those books were on when they wrote them, or made some of those or what they were on when they made those Saturday morning cartoons we used to like to watch. Yeah, I mean, where's the trade-off, right? I mean, Juan Soto is not a particularly good defensive outfielder, but I think there's a trade one would be willing to make for a little more offense out of a corner outfield spot at the expense of some defense, right? Especially if Dalton Varsho is going to be playing center field, he's going to lock the gaps down for you more often than not. George Springer, as long as he's healthy, is a pretty good right fielder. Juan Soto can make the plays. It just means he isn't necessarily going to make the highlight reel plays often. But I'm trading that for a 950 OPS. I mean, I think you got to find that happy medium. Griff, well, there's no question about it.
The other thing is that when the new configuration of the home plate area of Rogers Center is in place, you're going to have maybe 10 feet less foul territory down the lines once you get beyond that third base cutout, and less foul territory actually behind third base before you hit the stands. And that's not only going to help the offense because they won't lose outs on those balls like the Oakland Coliseum where you just run forever and make a catch, and that would have been 15th row in most stadiums. But that'll help the Blue Jays offense in terms of giving them a second life on balls that maybe in the past would have been caught. But it'll also help them in a way defensively in left field and third base, where you had Dalton Varsho and Matt Chapman, two of the best defenders in baseball. But now with less foul territory in both left field and third base, maybe you could take a step back and have a guy who gives you more offensively, and you won't notice defensively because of the change in the configuration. So, I mean, looking at the glass half full, that could be a possibility to help this team compete, especially if they went out and got a guy like Juan Soto.
I'm just thinking about how many times next year I'm going to be watching Blue Jays home games and thinking about you and the configuration talk.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be thinking, how many of these plays got made because the configuration changed? Because you like,
you see the left fielder thinking
we logged off last week, and I was like, shit, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, that's a possibility here. And it's not like there was a ton of foul territory down the lines in the outfield.
Yeah, beforehand. There was enough where a guy could go into a slide and in foul territory, go into a slide and make a great catch against the wall. Yeah. That's going to happen in 2024. Right.
Yeah, it's either you're going to catch the ball because it's in play, or it's going to go on the other side of the screen and land in somebody's beer.
Yep.
We want to just
we're not always negative about this. We're looking at it in maybe even in a glass 2/3 full, not a third empty.
Yeah, I just always say about me, Griff, I just tell you what I believe. So, and I joke with people, sidetrack here. I'm like, if you're looking for a positive outlook on the state of the world and the state of human behavior in this day and age, I am not the guy you want to talk to about that. It isn't good. But in the very same way, people are like, you just want to criticize the front office. No, if they don't land Juan Soto in a trade, unless we get concrete, confirmed reporting that they didn't even try, there's nothing to criticize. Shohei Ohtani doesn't end up a Blue Jay, there's nothing to criticize. If they made the effort and a guy with a choice chose somewhere else, he chose somewhere else. I mean, it's not just throw darts for the sake of throwing darts. When you throw a dart, it's supposed to hit the bullseye or come damn close. Nothing's being done here for the sake of it. So let's just see how it plays out. But I believe Ohtani's going to end up being a Dodger until he signs elsewhere, and then he'll be with that team. And if it's the Blue Jays, for the third and final time on this episode, I will say I will be happy to come onto this show and admit that I was wrong.
Yeah, and the other thing to understand and to believe moving forward to February and spring training of 24 is that if the Jays do not land Ohtani, which I agree with you is the likeliest scenario, and they don't manage to trade for Juan Soto, that doesn't mean they're done. That means that they'll be looking for 3, because they have 4 vacancies in position players. They'll be looking for 3 replacements at the highest level that they can find. So the judgment should not be made when they lose Ohtani or when they don't make the trade for Soto. It should wait until to see, heading to spring training, what this 40-man roster looks like.
Well, yeah, the judgment is, what does the roster look like? The judgment is, what are the results in the 2024 season, not just regular season, but playoffs. The judgment is pairing everything I just said there with the state of the farm system, because that has as much to do with, quote, process as anything else. And where are we at the point when a decision needs to be made whether to allow this front office to carry on into a 10th year on the job? And And so what I'm hoping, and based on the reporting we're reading and whatnot, maybe they'd be in on these guys anyway. So I don't want to turn this into a narrative of there's some kind of urgency. But what I'm hoping is that there is every effort being made to make this team the best it can be, to put it in the best possible position to have a successful regular season that translates into a successful October, so that we can continue to move the train along the tracks here in the right direction. Because this front office, through its own behavior, through its tone, through the weird verbiage that it uses to describe very mundane things, the aloofness and all that, people are tired of it. Not everybody. I'm not speaking for everybody, but I'm tired of it. And a lot of people are tired of it. And it's time for some results. It's time for some friggin' results. And baseball is a hard sport, is not an excuse. It's hard for the team that won the World Series this year. It's hard for the team that made it to the World Series but didn't win it. Weird stuff happens. Yes, weird stuff happens. Weird stuff happens to teams that win it all as well. Baseball's hard. Weird stuff happens. It's a crapshoot. Yep, it's a crapshoot. Good. Great. Every conceivable excuse all the time. I'm not interested in it. Let's just see how they perform in 2024, match it up with the entirety of the organization and see where it goes. But I'm pleased that they're playing with the big fish, or at least seem to be. Whether they're being leveraged or used as leverage or not is not up to them. But at least they are playing with the big fish.
Yeah, I think in the past, when you talk pre-2013, they were leveraged quite a bit, because everybody knew that they weren't players, but they were always the mystery team. And Prince Fielder is a perfect example. Scott Boras was the agent, and knowing that Alex Anthopoulos and before him, JP Ricciardi, wouldn't comment, whether you brought them in as a rumor or not, they wouldn't comment on it. And so it was an easy target, even though fans knew that it was like BS. It wasn't happening. But now you can't say that, because there's a definite possibility, or there's a probability, that they're right at the top of the Ohtani bidding, and also will be there for the Juan Soto if they don't land Ohtani, which is likely. So, but the one thing that, before we wrap up and go to NFL, the one thing that I think we will find out is what kind of a manager John Schneider is. Like, I've cut him more slack than you have in his first year and a half, but I think that this year will be the time where we discover whether he's a long-term solution, whether he could create a career that started slowly like Terry Francona, create a career that started quickly like Sparky Anderson. But you don't get to be a veteran like Jim Leland without having had those first 2 or 3 years. So that's why I've been willing to give John Schneider the benefit of the doubt. But I think that in 2024, we'll find out whether he can be a leader of a championship team.
And I'll say this for John Schneider. I think 75 to 80% of that is within his control, Griff, and the rest is within his boss's control. So what needs to happen is, John Schneider's an organizational guy, and he has been around as a minor league manager through previous regimes. And he has gone along to get along to advance his career. That is not a criticism. That's just a comment. I mean, people do that. We've all done that at points in our lives. And now he's his own man. He is working in a collaborative environment, but he is his own man. What would help him, in the other 20 to 25% that I'm talking about, is if his general manager, his boss, could work through his own insecurities to allow his manager the opportunity to get out from underneath the thumb just a little bit.
There's two things.
Ross, you put John in that position, let him do his job.
There's two things that I think he's benefited from since the season ended. And first is watching four old managers who don't just take the information that they're given and use it the next day according to what they're told how to use it. I mean, he can't help but have benefited from watching Bochy and Dusty Baker go at it in the World Series. That's number one. Number two is very subtle reference by Mark Shapiro at his year-end presser that we need to communicate better with the players. We need to communicate, for instance, the Barrios. They needed to tell him instead of just knowing among themselves that this was going to happen and then surprising everyone in that clubhouse with the decision to have him face 12 batters when he was dealing. I took that as what Shapiro was talking about. We need to communicate from our side of the clubhouse to that side of the clubhouse much better. And the Barrios thing is just one time that happened, and they need to do it more often. And if Schneider can benefit from that and be more communicative with the blessing of his front office, then I think he's got a chance.
Yeah, and that's the key. And quite frankly, if I didn't say it clearly enough at the time, then my bad. John Schneider emerged, in my mind, personally speaking, after the year-end press conferences as a sympathetic figure. I felt for him because I thought about John Gibbons, I thought about Charlie Montoyo, and I thought, the manager's job, and maybe it's this way in a lot of, or all of, I don't know, but a lot of franchises and organizations now, the manager's job is this hybrid, like, I got to communicate the will of my superiors to my players, so I've got to somehow keep my players happy and confident in the job I'm doing, while also telling them things that I have no power over, but I'm the conduit that they're not going to like to hear. And so, but that's why I'm saying, like, Ross, I'm a person. Griff's a person. You're a person. We're all human beings here. None of us are perfect. We've all screwed up. We've all done things right in our lives, done things wrong in our lives. We all wear that to whatever extent. You can too, and it's okay. Drop the insecurity level just a bit and empower the people you have hired in positions to do their jobs. And I think John Schneider can shine if he's empowered from on high.
Yeah, I laughed, and I'll give you the sequence that made me laugh, is that for a year and a half after John Schneider took over from Charlie Montoyo, the feeling among fans and among media was that John Schneider was just carrying out the wishes of the front office, of the analytics people, of the general manager. He would just, every day he would go in the dugout and he would just be managing for someone else. So Ross Atkins was always going, no, that's not the case. He's his own. He calls the game. He makes the lineup. He does everything. And then finally, when he gets the chance at his post-season presser, Atkins is trying to say that John Schneider is his own man, and it ends up throwing him under the bus for the Barrios decision to take him out, thinking that he was
no, I know.
Manager.
I know,
fact, but there are tire marks on John Schneider's ass from that.
Right. Annie Savoy, Susan Sarandon's character in Bull Durham, right toward the end of the movie. The world is made for those who are not cursed with self-awareness. One of the great lines in any movie I've ever heard. And just because you ascend to seven-figure employment doesn't mean you're self-aware. And I didn't think that Ross Atkins had a dagger out for John Schneider that day. I just saw a guy who has displayed repeatedly for 8 years that he lacks in complete self-awareness and just thought he was doing the right thing when he wasn't. And that's just how it is. So I know we're going back down a road here, but like, give the man, John Schneider, a chance. Give him a chance to do his job. Support him, provide him the information, etc., and then let him call the shots. And if they're 78 and 84 at the end of the season, maybe he ain't the guy. But maybe they'll be 95 and 67, and he proves that he is more than just the guy. He's the guy you want here for a long time. So just empower people. Speaking of empowering people, Griff, shout out to Ben Wagner, who didn't get empowered at any point. And so Ben Wagner is not returning as the Toronto Blue Jays play-by-play voice. Now, I sat in the booth with Ben Wagner for a while in the 2019 season, and I just want to say this. You know, I turned 40 years old in 2019. So I was 39 when I started working very closely with Ben. And I had been around the Blue Jays for a number of seasons by that point. And having said all of that, you know, approaching middle age, having been around the ballparks, been around the team for a long time, I very quietly, I don't know if I ever said this to him, but I very quietly observed his day-to-day routine, the work that he put in, the conversations I would witness him have. I wouldn't necessarily hear what was being talked about, but I would just see how he would bounce around the batting cage during BP and talk to different people. And then we'd be on the air, he'd be calling the game, and I'd be sitting right beside him, and I'd hear him tell the stories, and I'd say, I saw him talking to so-and-so at 4:10 this afternoon. I saw him talking to so-and-so at 4:25. He's relaying that conversation. I didn't hear what was said at the time, but I'm pretty sure what was said now because I'm hearing him talk about it. Ben Wagner put the work in on a day-in, day-out basis. He never got a fair shake. He deserved better, and he deserved to be treated better going out the door, but there are unfortunate patterns that certain people in powerful positions display. And so, well, nobody is owed perpetual employment, and nobody is owed anything beyond what is included in their contract. There is a way to deal with people, and you can choose. You can choose. And I'll just say that Ben Wagner deserved better, and I'm rooting for Ben. He deserves to land on his feet in whatever gig comes next for him.
Amen. And I consider Ben Wagner a friend. I met him the same time you did, went spring training when he was auditioning for the play-by-play job. And the improvement that he showed from 2019, where he had all his minor league cliches and delivery, to 2023 was amazing, considering the handicap of doing road games from a TV monitor, or the same TV shots that we were seeing at home. He was in a studio doing the game by himself a lot of the time, off of a monitor. And like you said, part of his thing was pre-game preparation, talking to players, talking to coaches, talking to the manager, and talking to other media members on the field and in the clubhouse. And not being on the road, you're behind the eight ball in terms of preparation, especially when that's a big part of what you do. And the way that he did it, no matter off radio, off mic, no matter how he was feeling, as soon as he got behind the mic, he was 100% professional and supportive of the players and the organization. And the disrespect that he was showed when he was let go is palpable with me.
Yeah. And there is a pattern there. And I'm not making comments about me. There's a pattern with others who have far higher profiles than I ever had, who've experienced it as bad or worse. So ugly pattern.
You're in there
needs
somewhere.
to be said.
As an outside observer, you're in there somewhere.
I'm in there somewhere, but I'm happy where I am, and it's all good by me. I just think there are some really good people who deserved better. Nobody's owed anything. Nobody's owed perpetual employment, but dealing with people isn't really a skill. It comes more down to will, a willingness, and dot. Yep. We'll leave it at that. But love you, Ben. In spite of the fact that you love your Indianapolis Colts, which proves once again that nobody's perfect and not everybody has great judgment all the time.
Which brings
look forward to seeing you again down the road.
Which brings me to the NFL portion of our show, our off-season show. Do you think the Niners have proved that they're the best team in football?
Well, if you're watching us right now on youtube.com/exitphilosophy, you will notice that, wait, I could even turn this hat. Boy, do I look insanely bad in that moment. But I'll put this thing back on backwards. You see the 49ers logo at the top. Yeah, so, okay, so Brock Purdy's a good quarterback, right? Are we allowed to say that now, or are we still going to have people argue that Brock Purdy, I mean, he's only 6 feet tall, and he doesn't have Brett Favre's arm, and what's he really done? Like, are we allowed to say that he's a good quarterback now?
I think what the haters say is irrelevant.
Right.
Mr.
Here's what the opposite. Yeah. Here's what the opposite of haters say. Brock Purdy's an MVP candidate. And I'm hearing a lot of hot takes. I go to the gym, Griff, and there's like a 200-inch TV on the wall. It encompasses a large part of the wall at the Good Life I go to. And so I never hear the volume, but I do see the ESPN day part shows depending on what time I'm at the gym. And there was a big thing Friday all day, it felt like, about Dak Prescott after they beat the Seahawks. And is he this year's NFL MVP? And, I'm lifting 7.5-pound dumbbells, hoping not to tear my bicep and all that stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, Dak Prescott's having a really nice year, but his team got destroyed by the 49ers, and his team lost the first of their 2 games to their division rival, Philadelphia Eagles. And I know there's another game coming between the Eagles and Cowboys, and that's next Sunday, and the 49ers could certainly use a Dallas victory in that game. But I'm thinking if Dak Prescott is a legitimate MVP candidate, he can't have lost to the Niners and gotten swept by the Eagles. Not when a guy like Brock Purdy beat the Cowboys 42-10 and the Eagles 42-19. And you don't like wins and losses being a defining MVP statistic? It's too complicated, or it's too uncomplicated. It doesn't tell us enough. Go look at your nerdy stats. I'm a nerdy football stat guy now, like I'm a nerdy baseball stat guy now. All the efficiency metrics, Brock Purdy is far and away the most efficient quarterback in the National Football League. Far and away. And it's not all yards after the catch. There is a lot of that. That's the brand of 49ers football that they play. But he has dropped some dimes into Brandon Ayuk, to George Kittle. We've seen some to Deebo Samuel, to every weapon he's got. Christian McCaffrey. This guy's a good quarterback. The 49ers are a hell of a team. And I'm not going to brag about anything in December, but if the Niners are healthy, I feel as good about it. I won't say what that is, but I feel, because I don't want to jinx it, but I feel as good about it happening this year as I have since they last won it almost 30 years ago.
Well, you got Chiefs, Bills, and Bengals are sort of taking several steps backwards that I can see. The Ravens are the best in that conference, it seems, and the Niners are, to me, more geared up towards winning a postseason game than the Ravens are.
But like Griff, look at the AFC, right? And nobody would argue
the quarterback conference.
Brilliant quarterbacks, fun offensive schemes with some teams. And we're sitting there in late August going, my goodness, I mean, which of these 7 or 8 teams is going to emerge as the AFC representative in the Super Bowl? Now, fast forward to 13 weeks through the season. Joe Burrow is down. Cincinnati is done. The Buffalo Bills have suffered horrific injury attrition on defense. Josh Allen is a brilliant quarterback, but is prone to trying to do too much and therefore making the mistake that results in an ugly interception at an inopportune time. The Bills are hovering right now. They're 6-6. Which direction are they going to go here toward the end? The Miami Dolphins look like they're going to play a home playoff game for the first time in a decade and a half by winning the AFC East. They've got a wonderful offense. They're a ton of fun to watch, but they haven't executed that offense successfully against a team with a good defense yet this year. The Kansas City Chiefs, and I hear about Brock Purdy. It's always about Brock Purdy with me now. I hear about how Brock Purdy's a system quarterback and is the product of all of the talent that is around him. Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs lost their 4th game of the season last night in Green Bay. More problems for Mahomes' offensive line. The 2 offensive tackles are terrible. The receivers stink this year. And oh my goodness, all of a sudden, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs have scored 20 or fewer points in 6 games this season. In Mahomes' first 5 years as a starting quarterback, the 5 years that preceded this one, they scored 20 or fewer points 6 times in those 5 years. Right? 16 or 17 game seasons, multiply that by 5. That's how many times, 6 times it happened in that total of games. Oh, so what is Patrick Mahomes, 2-time Super Bowl champion, MVP winner, suddenly a system guy and a product of what's around him? Every quarterback is to some extent. Even Mahomes doesn't have the magic. The Chiefs are vulnerable. You know, the Pittsburgh Steelers are a total fraud on offense despite having an elite defense. The Jacksonville Jaguars need Trevor Lawrence to take the next step into the elite status of quarterbacks if they are to contend legitimately at the top of the AFC deep into the playoffs. I look at this as a Baltimore Ravens conference to lose, really. I mean, they're going to have to step on their own toes, in my opinion, to not be the AFC representative in the Super Bowl.
So you got Baltimore, Miami, Jacksonville, and then you have the Niners, Cowboys, and Eagles. And the Lions have proved to be a bit of a hype job.
Yeah, I still think you got to throw the Chiefs in on the AFC side, though, only because it is Mahomes, only because it is Andy Reid, and only because that defense is.
But their receivers drop or run the wrong pattern. And how often are you seeing Mahomes just pulling his helmet off because Marquez Valdez-Scantling ran the wrong pattern or turned the wrong way and the ball dropped in, or one
Valdez-Scantling dropped that pass against the Eagles, and maybe, I don't know, he's an ex-Packer. Maybe last night he was a secret agent.
I think maybe you find out why they let him go, you know?
Yeah, well, they're excellent point. Yeah, so anyway, I mean, I always say the NFL season's different than baseball, than hockey, than basketball, because you have to, if you're a diehard fan, you have to live with the result for typically 7 days. And when the team you cheer for is good and you've been through some bad, and I did with the Niners from like 04 to 2010 and 15 and 16, I find myself appreciating it even more. And like even in the lead into yesterday's game, I'm like, man, 49ers, Eagles, the 2 top teams in the NFC, the major TV window late yesterday afternoon. These games don't come along every week. And sometimes you go years and years and years and years and years between them.
Yeah.
So the fact the Niners won by 23 points is awesome, but the fact that they're playing in games like that in December in a place like Philadelphia in and of itself is a lot of fun.
And then there's those who would say that if Patrick Mahomes had the offensive weapons that Brock Purdy has, that they'd be putting up twice as many points.
Yeah, if so, I'm not walking around saying
Debo and Ayuk before McCaffrey came along.
Yeah, no, I'm not sitting here saying that Brock Purdy is the best quarterback in the National Football League. I'm just saying,
is he a game manager?
He's better than game manager.
Oh,
game managers are captain checkdowns. I go through my progressions, and that guy running the go route might be open, but I'm not confident I can slip that ball over the cornerback and lead my guy into the end zone. So I'm not going to risk screwing it up or throwing a pick, so I'm just going to check it down into the flats here for a 5-yard gain. That's what game managers do. Brock Purdy, efficiency metrics guy over here, Brock Purdy on intermediate throws and deep throws has some of the best numbers in the game. He's not scared. He's got pinpoint accuracy a lot of time. He's a hell of a football player. And if he was a first-round draft pick, Griff, people would be talking about him differently. They would be.
I think we need to step aside and go watch what's happening at the winter meetings. And so next time we're on, we'll either have a result midweek or we'll be back again next Monday.
Yeah, but so that's part of the plan.
I have a feeling that we will have to go on and do one midweek, later in the week, because I think that the Players Association and other agents are hoping that Ohtani makes a decision sooner rather than later, so that the dam will be broken and that other moves can be made.
You got it. So if you're listening, and most of our following listens on the podcast platforms, just a reminder that we are on YouTube at youtube.com/exit philosophy. And Griff and I will go live with reaction to any move that the Blue Jays make, especially if it's significant. And if one or the both of us are out running errands or doing something and we need like an hour to get back home and sit down and set up our laptops, we'll take a little bit of grace to do that. But our plan is to react as immediately as possible as moves get made this week. Griff, it should be a lot of fun.
And in the meantime, check out Griff's The Pitch for the latest interview with Pat Tabler. A great interview with, if I do say so myself, talking about his relationship with Buck Martinez, why he was such a clutch hitter with the bases loaded, Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, all sorts of topics. And it's a good interview. And we have one for Expos fans coming up later this week, and we'll publish it early next week with Ellis Valentine, the greatest arm that I've ever seen in baseball.
Yeah, Tabby's the man. So griffsthepitch.com, and Ellis Valentine a little before my time with the Expos, but can't wait to hear some of his stories. You've shared a few. They're pretty epic. He was a hell of a player and a hell of a personality in the game. So griffsthepitch.com, and Griff continues to write throughout the offseason. So it's the conversations with the current and former Blue Jays and former Expos. It's the Exit Philosophy podcast, and it's also Griff's writing, which you enjoyed for so long in places like the Toronto Star prior to this. So we will convene again next Monday for sure for our regular episode of Exit Philosophy, and we hope that we are with you at least once on youtube.com/exit philosophy in between now and next Monday. It'll mean a move or two has been made by the Blue Jays. Until we speak to you next, have a great week.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks, Scotty.